So let's turn our attention to the main topics of discussion that we wanted to cover on this week's edition of Dollars and Cents, where we help you make sense out of all of life's decisions involving your dollars. First up is the conversation of how property actually passes. When you own an investment, when you own a retirement account, when you own a house, how does that actually pass once you die? There's a lot of misconceptions out there on this one. And unfortunately, what that also means is that there's a lot of missed opportunities. And I guess chief among them is this notion that a lot of people believe that if I have a will, then I'm all set. Then all of that property will get transferred after I die, and no issues at all, no probate or anything like that. And while it's certainly important to have a will, you don't necessarily want to not have one. The reality is that a will does not avoid probate. Let me say that again. A will does not avoid probate. In fact, the will is the very document that is used in the probate process as to determine what goes where. Far too often, folks assume that because I've got a will, I can avoid the probate process. And I guess to really appreciate sort of how you can effectively approach these issues is you first have to understand how property actually passes. And so when we think of that, how property passes, it's actually going to be in one of sort of three main categories. It's either going to be by operation of law, category 1, category 2, operation of contract, or category 3, will. So those are the three main categories of how property passes. Let's talk a little bit about what each one of those means, because they're all a little different. Okay, so operation of law, that concept of how property is going to pass, has to deal with how the asset is titled. So based on the titling of the particular asset, that's how it's going to pass after you pass away, regardless of what any other document or will or anything like that says. So if we think of the main ways in which you can title property, maybe it's a joint ownership. Is it joint ownership with rights of survivorship? Is it a tenancy by the entirety? Is it tenancy in common? We'll get to what all of those concepts means. But the reality is, here would be a good example of where the operation of law sort of trumps whatever other planning that you've done. So let's say you've got two kids, one son, one daughter. For whatever reason, you like the daughter better, and you say to the daughter, "I'm going to leave you the house that you were raised in because I like you better." And but the problem is that the actual title on the house, it was jointly with you and your son. Well, what happens in that particular case? Well, if you pass away, it doesn't matter what you said to your daughter. It doesn't matter even if you maybe put that in the will, because of the titling, because of this concept of operation of law, then that house will in fact pass to your son rather than your daughter, regardless of what you may have said in any other document or what you may have said while you were living. And that's why it's so important to review the titling of the various assets that you have, right? So when we talk about this concept of operation of law, it really has to deal with titling of the account. If you title the account in your individual name only, then that assures that asset is going to go to probate, because again, the process of probate is proving who gets what after you're gone. And when it's an individually titled asset, there's no automatic ownership once you pass. The easiest example to see how this plays out is when you have a joint tenancy with rights of survivorship. So in that case, it's 2 people or 3 people or 4 people, whatever, okay? And everybody is a joint owner, and everybody becomes the remaining owner as people pass away. So let's say there's two people, that's the easy one. One person passes away, it automatically goes to the remaining person, and it does that without having to go through probate. It does that irregardless of what your will or any other document you might have out there says is going to happen. So that's why it's so crucial to make sure that you're reviewing the titling of your various assets on a regular basis, because this concept of operation of law comes into play, and that in fact determines who gets what when it comes to a particular asset. Clearest example is if it's a joint tenancy with rights of survivorship, then automatically sort of the last man standing, or woman, is going to be the person that owns the property. There's other types of registrations that you can use, or titling options that you can use, but just know that that concept about operation of law has to deal with titling, which is why you always want to kind of check the titling. The other category of the three main categories of how property passes has to deal with this concept of operation of contract. And that simply means that that's an account where you're naming beneficiaries directly in the account titling or the account registration, or maybe in the case of like a life insurance or a retirement account, it's part of the standard agreement that you sign when you open up those accounts. Bottom line on this piece is make sure you take the time, just as you need to take the time to review how assets are titled in order to make sure that assets are going to effectively pass by operation of law. When it comes to the operation of contract concept, you've got to really take the time to double check who the beneficiaries are on the various accounts, because who you have named as a beneficiary will be the individual that gets that account once you pass. The stories are too numerous for a single episode of Dollars and Cents, but the easiest one to think of here is you name a ex-wife, or when you were married, you named the wife, you got divorced, you got remarried, but the but the prior wife was still on as a beneficiary on the account. Much to the chagrin of your new wife, you're going to find that the ex-wife is going to get it if you left her on as a beneficiary. Now, here in the state of Florida, there's some rules that sort of prevent that, but you get the idea. Make sure that you take the time to double check who you're naming as beneficiaries. And then if it's an account, so on like a retirement account or insurance contract or something like that, that's part of the standard sort of application process, right? If you've ever opened up a retirement account, you know, they ask you, who do you want to be your beneficiaries? Another thing that you can do, though, is you can always add on a registration known as a transfer on death registration or a payable on death registration. Those effectively add in beneficiaries to a particular registration. And so ultimately then when you pass, then whoever those beneficiaries are, that's who automatically is going to get the balance or that particular asset. Now, when you name beneficiaries, there's two important concepts to remember. You can have primary versus contingent, and you can have per stirpes versus per capita. So let's take a moment and talk about those. Primary beneficiary, as the name suggests, is the first beneficiary. So something happens to you, goes to the first beneficiary. If the first beneficiary has predeceased you, then it goes to the contingent beneficiary. So that's the distinction between primary versus contingent beneficiaries. The other concept, per stirpes or per capita, is one that we find people that get a little tripped up on. Here's how it works. So per stirpes is sort of Latin for by the branch, right? So stirpes, this concept basically means that it goes down the family tree, if you will. So that's the concept. So if you name three people per stirpes, and one of them predeceases you, then that person's share is going to go to their children. So that's how that concept works. Per capita is your classic last man standing. I named three people, and the last one standing gets it all if the other ones have predeceased. So understand those concepts when you're naming beneficiaries. With that, we're going to take a break here on Dollars and Cents with your host, Joel Garris of Nelson experts in financial planning, and return back to this conversation of how property actually passes after these messages.